This, ladies and gentlemen, may have been what happened to Auntie Maghas. She went to the University of Nairobi, got a degree in chemistry, decided to go to Cincinnati, University of Cincinnati, got a PhD in chemistry, analytical chemistry, worked in corporate America, but there was something that was not clicking. She decided to act on that scary thing that you get in the middle of the night when you're wondering, am I in the right place? And enrolled at the Kellogg School of Management at the Northwestern University in Chicago and got an MBA. And I think that's when she started getting a groove back. She became a business person. She became an entrepreneur, both in the US and here in Kenya. And she is here to tell us what that journey was like under the topic of our first lecture in 2026. Whose ambition is it anyway? Reach freedom on a non-linear path. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our speaker, Dr. Ann T. Maghas, to the stage to tell us how we can work with these disruptions. Ann, please welcome.
Thank you so much, Professor Tarangi, for inviting me. I was here about 2 months ago, saw all kinds of people walking around campus, so I'm glad to be in this room to actually have a conversation because I was seeing people and there were questions in my head, so I'm glad we're gathered today, so we'll have a conversation. So you know those kids that tie their own shoelaces and they insist on it, even though the outcome is very questionable? That was me. Determined long before I had any skills. I'm 7 years old. I've packed a suitcase. And guess what? I'm going to boarding school. Now, you're probably thinking, what kind of parents make that decision for someone that young? But it wasn't their idea. It was mine. My parents had already left. They had gone to the bus stop with my older siblings. And I took the short walk there and slid in right next to them. My mom noticed my suitcase. And she asked the obvious question, what are you doing here? And with all the confidence in the world, I told her, I'm going to boarding school. I didn't make it to boarding school that day. But a week later, I was in boarding school. Waking up at 6 a.m. with all the little kids, making my bed, I was embracing this adventure I'd chosen for myself. And then about a year later, with the same confidence that got me there, I quit. I simply walked out. I was done. The food was terrible, and I'd reached my limit. Now, when I look back at that 7-year-old, isn't it amazing how brave we are when we're younger? Before we've learned to second guess ourselves. Before we've learned to shrink. And at what point do we lose that clarity? Is it when we start chasing credentials or when we start comparing ourselves to others? Because we're good at that. I was reminded of this just last year. I found myself in a room with people so impressive. I wondered why I was there. So I quickly surveyed the room and decided to give myself an F. So, you know, that's what imposter syndrome does. On the last session in the afternoon, something clicked. That 7-year-old that packed a suitcase without permission poked through. And I found myself on stage. I was shaking, my voice was trembling. And as I looked out in the audience, there was somebody wiping tears. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't afraid of the microphone. I wasn't even afraid of failing. My fear was judgment. I was afraid to be seen and found not to be impressive enough. That fear doesn't just stay on stages, it follows us in our lives, in our careers. It's the fear that fuels our excellence. It even makes us high achieving. But it's the same fear that makes us choose lives that are not ours. So we end up doing what we're supposed to do, and we become less and less clear on who we are and what we actually want. See, the problem is not ambition. It's whose ambition are you pursuing? Is it yours? Or is it borrowed? Are you living the life you want or the one you were told to want? If you hesitated just for a minute, I see some of you minds moving. After decades of walking that winding path, from scientist to entrepreneur to investor to mentor, I consider myself a student of ambition. And this is one thing I have learned. Success can look perfect and still feel hollow. You can achieve everything and still lay awake at 2 a.m. pondering. This doesn't make you ungrateful for your achievements or even confused about what you want. This is what makes us human. And it happens to the best of us, even at the pinnacle of our success. When I decided to go to grad school, I didn't analyze it too much. It felt inevitable. See, like most of you, my family believed in education. My parents sacrificed for it. And I delivered. I excelled in school. I got good grades. I won scholarships. I did everything I was supposed to do. But I remember one time in the lab, just waiting for a distillation to complete, something started brewing underneath. There was a mismatch between the life that I was preparing my career for and what I was feeling. Not confusion, just a little something. And I asked myself, I'm on the path I'm supposed to be on. Why is it feeling empty? You see, I had followed the script exactly as written. They say, be disciplined, choose a good career, and be focused. And I was succeeding at the script. But it wasn't my script. You're probably doing well. You're checking all the boxes. You're at a good institution here. Your parents are proud of you. Maybe some of you are the first ones to go to university. Your professors are proud of you and they're impressed with how well you're doing. And maybe even your friends say, oh, you have it all figured out. But there's something when you're walking around campus between classes that's nagging at you. You're asking yourself, am I preparing for the right career for me? Or am I just doing what makes sense? For most of us, that friction is not a mystery. It's a side effect of something we don't talk about enough. Society demands so much certainty from us too early in our life. At 19 or 20 years old, you're supposed to pick a direction for your career that will shape decades of your life. You're supposed to choose your major and stick to it, even though you don't even know yourself enough, before you know what energizes you or what drains your energy. You're supposed to choose to be an engineer before you even know what an engineer does. So you know what most of us do? We do the reasonable thing. We pick something sensible, something impressive. And then, before we realize it, we've inherited expectations we never agreed to. Society's expectations. Society's definition of success. That's society's ambition. And that's how we get trapped. That's how we end up with borrowed ambition. And borrowed ambition creates this gap between achievement and fulfillment. And no matter how much you score on somebody else's scorecard, you don't get fulfillment because it's not yours. Now, let's talk about why this gap is important, this gap between achievement and fulfillment, why it matters to us. According to Bronnie Ware, a nurse that worked with dying patients and documented in a book, the number one regret that people had while they were dying was this: I wish I had lived my life true to myself and not what others expect of me. They didn't regret not having a lot of money. They didn't regret having more achievements. Their number one regret was this: I wish I had lived my life, not other people's expectations. Because the thing with borrowed ambition is no matter how successfully you achieve it, it leaves you at the end of life wishing you had chosen differently. And if this feeling is sounding familiar to some of you, you're not alone. Most of us are carrying borrowed ambition. Goals we didn't choose. Success that's defined by expectations and approval of others. And we end up with this situation where on the outside, everything looks like it's working. But on the inside, something is unfinished, unsettled. That's the gap of borrowed ambition. And that's what we're here to talk about today. To dismantle borrowed ambition and start to let it go. So if borrowed ambition creates this gap between achievement and fulfillment, why do we still keep pursuing it? It's because we've been sold some lies and myths that keep us trapped on this conveyor belt. The first myth we've been sold is this: that achievement will lead to fulfillment. We already know that you can achieve everything and still feel empty. And there's a reason why this happens. According to Sean Ecker, a Harvard researcher that studies success and happiness, this is what he's found, something that will be very familiar to most of us. We all silently walk around with a formula in our head. This formula is saying, if I get X, then I'll be happy. So we're telling ourselves, if I get that job, then I'll be happy. If I get that salary, I'll be happy. If I get that promotion, I will definitely be happy. That's how we're trapping ourselves. But this is what actually happens. He found that when you achieve X, you get a brief spike in happiness, maybe for a day, maybe even a few weeks. Then your happiness returns to the baseline. This is called hedonic adaptation. You adapt to achievements and they no longer bring you happiness. That is why borrowed ambition is so exhausting, because the goalpost keeps moving. And no matter how hard you try, more achievements will not close the gap between achievement and fulfillment. Only aligning with your values will close that gap. The second myth we've been sold is this: that success requires a linear path. You had Prof talk about that linear path. We've been told, choose a major, get your degree, start your career, climb the ladder, and don't deviate from that path. Deviation means you're lost and you're wasting time. People who take detours are distracted. People who follow nonlinear paths are unfocused and lack discipline. That's what we've been told. But that's not true. I know this because I have lived nonlinear path. I have not lived a straight line. Let me tell you about my path. Not the tidy one you probably saw on LinkedIn. That's for somebody else, but for you guys in the room. We'll talk about the real path. The one that is full of detours that looked like mistakes. But they turned out to be very necessary in my journey. So like we talked about before, after undergrad, I did what most of us do, what most of you will probably do. I got on the conveyor belt. Going to grad school felt inevitable, so I went. 9 years later, I had a PhD in chemistry. Now, here's the part you won't find on LinkedIn. I never asked myself why I was doing it. I never asked whose ambition it was. I just kept going because movement felt like progress. And after that long disciplined tunnel, I graduated. I got the job I was supposed to want, a research scientist at a company. Everything was going excellent. Everything was going exactly according to plan. But I remember every time I would walk into the lab, there was a quiet awareness that something was shifting. I had prepared almost a decade for this career in the lab. And now I had to admit to myself that I wasn't feeling connected to the work. But what do you do with that truth? What do you do when you've invested so much of your time preparing for this thing that now you don't want? Your family is proud of you. Your identity is tied to that expertise. Walking away from this just feels irresponsible. But I also knew that staying in this lab position was starting to feel impossible. I didn't have words for what I was feeling. But I knew I had one thing, curiosity. So I embraced the curiosity. That's how I found myself in a project management role within the same company, where I could work with people instead of being alone in the lab. And I came alive again. I embraced this. I was working with scientists, engineers, designers, and the pace and the urgency of what we were doing was very refreshing for me, and I loved it. So I settled into that rhythm. I was doing global projects in Europe and Asia and working with cross-cultural teams. My passport was full of stamps. And for someone that loves to travel, I was in heaven. I was like, yes, this is it. This is what I was missing. And then a little bit into that, some projects were good, some projects were questionable. And I was like, who decided this project? Because some of them, in my humble opinion, should not have been on the project list. So I got curious and I asked around, who decides what projects get on the list? And I was told it was the business people. That stirred something in me. I was like, okay. I wonder what it would be like to sit at that table choosing the projects. That curiosity is what got me to business school. But the minute I arrived in business school, a new fear surfaced. Everyone had the same question. What are you doing here? Don't you have a higher degree? Are you sure you know what you're doing? Translation. You're off the path. You're off the script. What are you doing here? The truth, I wasn't sure either. Because having spent most of my time on the science world where things are clear and it's very binary, being in business school, you know the business people, I hope there are a few of you in this room, the world is very gray. Nothing is binary. Everything is negotiable. So I wasn't sure I could fit into this space. I was terrified, actually, because I thought I'm built for the science. I'm not built for this subjective world. But this is one thing I knew. I had not arrived to business school on a conveyor belt. I had chosen this detour for myself. And that detour was leading me somewhere very unexpected. You know when you climb a hill, a small hill, and you get to the top, and you're just climbing it to get a good view. But once you get there, the horizon opens up. And you see so many hills out there that you didn't know existed. That's where I saw the hill of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship terrified me because it meant leaving the safety of a job, the safety of a salary. I wasn't sure I had what it would take to live up to what success would be in entrepreneurship. But it also energized me. For the first time, I started asking different questions. Not the usual ones of what am I good at? What's the next logical step? No, I started getting different questions. The questions that were surfacing for me were, what do I actually want? What kind of life do I want to build? And when those questions entered my mind, that 7-year-old that had packed her suitcase smiled because she recognized that feeling. She recognized the clarity of those questions. So without any guarantee of success, I stepped into entrepreneurship. Over a decade, I co-founded 3 companies, 2 in the US and 1 here in Kenya. Building a company requires so many skills. And this is where everything started to integrate for me. All that figure it out mindset from my science training came full circle. The project management skills that I had became essential in building a company from scratch. Every entrepreneur will tell you, when you start a company from scratch, you're the HR person, you're marketing, you're legal, you're finance, you're the cleaning lady. You wear all those hats all at the same time. For me, that integration was key to what I wanted to do. This gave me the most fulfilling and creative years of my life, being an entrepreneur. But these years were also anxiety-inducing. Every entrepreneur will tell you the monthly payroll seems to come every 2 days. Everything moves so fast when things are depending on you. I remember one moment when everything, all the detours I had taken became essential. I ran a logistics company. So when the pandemic hit and the world shut down, we had to go out delivering everything to everyone. I was scared because you never knew what would happen day after day. In a period of 6 weeks, I had to increase my team from 56 people to over 100 people. It felt like I was sprinting into the wilderness. And the question at the back of my mind all the time was this: what happens if one of us gets COVID? Because this was the early days, there was no vaccine. And then one afternoon, I got the text, and I tested positive. That's the text I was dreading. Within an hour, I found myself on a Zoom call with over 20 people, operations people, legal, HR people, all trying to help me figure out what to do next. My phone would not stop ringing. That's when something clicked. I went back into scientist mode, and that's what kept me focused. For 4 days, I was everything all at once. I was a therapist for my team that was scared and needed someone to hold space for them. I was the communicator in chief, delivering updates with honesty, but without causing any panic. I was also the bridge between my team and the team member that was in hospital and needed reassurance. And here is something that leadership books don't tell you. In that period, I had to get a fax number, fax machine. I know it's 2020, but I needed to get a fax number. And I'll tell you why I needed to get a fax number. And I see some of you are looking at me like, oh, why would you need a fax machine in 2020? Oh, you don't even know how a fax machine works. Let me explain to you how a fax machine works. You have this machine, put in a document, you scan it, it turns it into audio signals. Yeah, actual sounds come out of the machine. And then it travels on the other end. There's another fax machine, receives those signals, magically turns them into an image. And somehow always manages to print in a slightly crooked way. It's very rare to get a fax that is printing out straight. So that's what happened in 2020. In the middle of a pandemic, I'm managing a crisis, and I have to Google, how do you get a fax number? I guess that's why they say entrepreneurship is not for the faint of heart. You never know when you're going to need to travel back to the 1980s and figure out how to work a fax machine. So I needed a fax because the hospital would only send patient information through fax. Not email, not a secure portal, no. Everything had to be done through fax. But we made it through that. Entrepreneurship has taught me many things. I have learned to take action without having all the information. If I had stayed on the linear path, from scientist to senior scientist to principal scientist, I would not have had all these skills. Those detours that I took were not distractions. They were preparing me for that moment I had the crisis. Because you can't make those connections looking forward. I could not have, thought about a year after I left the lab. I could not have been thinking, oh, this will come in handy in 15 years when there's a global pandemic and I will need the scientific thinking and the people skills to navigate a crisis. No, I wasn't thinking that because that's ridiculous. And that's the thing with detours. Detours don't make sense looking forward. But looking backwards, it's crystal clear. It's crystal clear that every detour, every wrong turn that I took was essential. Every wasted degree was integrated when I needed it. Those detours are what have made me who I am today. I integrate experiences. I follow curiosities. And that's why my skills are broad in a way that would not have happened if I'd stayed on the straight line. Now, I'm not the only one who understands that nonlinear paths are useful. Steve Jobs said it in a commencement speech that is famous, and you probably have heard it. This is what he said. You cannot connect dots looking forward. The dots only connect looking backward. And you have to trust that your dots will connect in the future. So if you're on a detour right now, this is what I want to say to you. You're not lost. You're learning. You're not wasting time. You're building something unique. So follow the curiosities that have gotten you to that detour. Because the straight line is just a myth designed to keep you predictable, but not to get you fulfilled. So please embrace your detours. The third myth we've been sold is this, that it's too late to align your path. We've been told you're too far in, you're too invested, like I was in my career. You're too old. But that's not true. Wangari Maathai was in her 40s when we got to know about her climate activism. She was 64 when she won the Nobel Prize. So it's not too late. The question is, how much longer are you staying on the borrowed path? Because every day you stay on the borrowed path is a day you're not living aligned. Every year you follow someone else's ambition is a year you're not following your own. So it's not too late. It's actually urgent. It's only too late to align if you never make the decision to start. Now, we've named the problem. We know borrowed ambition is a problem. And we've dismantled the myths that get us trapped on that. Now, the question is, how do we move away from borrowed ambition to start aligning ourselves? I have a framework. 3 steps. First step is recognize when you have borrowed ambition. Second step, rediscover what your values are. The third step is realign your path. We'll go through each one of them. So the first step is recognize when you're carrying borrowed ambition. This is what's tricky about borrowed ambition. It doesn't show up looking borrowed. It shows up looking like opportunity. It shows up feeling like the next logical step. I'll give you an example when I encountered borrowed ambition. I got a chance to expand my company to a place called Sussex. It was a huge expansion, a chance to double everything. And it was a kind of opportunity you say yes to without blinking. But I told myself, let me sleep on it, because this was a big delta for me. Next morning, I woke up, no spreadsheets, no analysis. I just asked myself, whose ambition is this? Would I be expanding because I want to, or because they want me to? And then the harder question, do I want the life that comes with this? Or do I just like the idea of it? And if I was being honest with myself, I knew the kind of life that came with that opportunity would take me back to those days I worked 18-hour days, when I'd leave the house at 6 a.m. and come back at midnight. That's the kind of life that came with that opportunity. I was clear I didn't want that life. I wanted the one I had finally managed to align. They were interested in expansion. I was interested in peace and more time to actually live my life and not hustle. The ambition was expansion. My ambition was alignment. And those two things are not the same. So I said no. And yeah, for a moment, I was like, are you sure? Are you not ambitious enough? Isn't that the whole point of being in business, is to make more money? But once the doubts were gone, I was proud of myself. I was proud for seeing the opportunity for what it was and what it wasn't. Proud that I asked the question, whose ambition is this? And had the humility to listen to the answer. Because just because something leads to success doesn't mean that success is yours. So here's a tool for recognition. Next time you have a project or a new opportunity come your way, ask yourself, if no one knew about this achievement, you couldn't post it on LinkedIn or social media, you couldn't put it on your resume, would you still pursue it? If the answer is no, you're looking at borrowed ambition. Recognition starts with asking the question, whose ambition is this? And having the humility to listen to the answer. Even if the answer is uncomfortable, even if it makes you disappoint some people. That's the first step, recognition. Second step is rediscover your values. This one is tricky also because people think you can think and figure out what your values are. Your values don't live in your head. They live in your gut, in the choices you make every day. For me, that moment of clarity happened on a regular weekday. I was late picking up my kids from daycare, and when I got there, it was just the kind lady and my 2 boys that were waiting outside. I buckled them to the car, and we started the short drive home. A minute into the drive, I hear this voice from the back. "Mom, what time did you leave work today?" And I said 5:17, but the traffic was bad. I should have been here sooner. And without missing a beat, he says, "Next time, can you leave before 5:17? In that moment, I asked myself, what's the point of doing all this if I'm not here when they need me, when they expect to see me? That's when I knew family time was a core value of mine. Yet I had been living my life as though that was not the case. That moment showed me that I was violating my own values every day. So if you want to rediscover your value, don't start with big philosophical exercises. Start with your real life. What keeps you up at night? What leaves a lump in your throat? Because right there is the source of your values. We all have different values, so pay attention to what is yours. Maybe for you, it's spending time with loved ones. Maybe it's doing the work that is meaningful to you, even though it's hard. Maybe it's making sure that you have time and freedom to spend it how you want. Your values are already in you. They're already sending signals. Just pay attention to them. That's the second step. Final step is realign your path. Now, realignment is not one dramatic quit. It's not blowing everything up and I'll start from scratch. No, realignment is both immediate and gradual. Immediate, like when I decided after that 5:17 moment that I would change how I manage my day. Or gradual, like when I decided to be an entrepreneur. The important thing is asking yourself, when will I know when it's time to realign? Usually, it starts with a feeling. You've heard me talk about feeling a certain way. You have to pay attention because that's when your system is letting you know something needs to shift. So it starts with a feeling way before you know it. And if you want some guiding questions to know what to do when that feeling hits you, ask yourself, is there a place where you're overcommitted, where you're just doing what looks good and not what feels right? Is there a place where you're feeling your energy drained instead of getting energized? Where time doesn't just fly, you're feeling like some resistance is showing up? Are there boundaries you need to set so that you feel more honest with that moment? That's the important thing. Pay attention to the feeling, not what it looks like. And realignment is not just one decision, it's a practice day in, day out to get back into alignment. Okay, so we started with a question, whose ambition is it? And we've now understood borrowed ambition and how it shows up in our lives. I want to take a short moment here to come back to the present in this moment we're living in. Because it's a lot. The world is shifting so fast, no one can predict what's going to happen next. Careers are shifting. Whole industries are disappearing. AI is rewriting rules before you guys can learn them. And everywhere you turn, somebody's telling you you're already behind. But in a world that is moving this fast and is this unpredictable, what grounds you matters more than how fast you move. That's where alignment comes in. Alignment will not get disrupted like other things we know. It won't get obsolete. It won't require you to compete with a machine. Alignment is the anchor that will hold you steady when the tides rise and fall. So yes, be curious about AI, learn the tools, but don't lose yourself trying to keep up. And if you're wondering how you stay grounded, for me, I look for something small and steady. I look for that 7-year-old that packed her suitcase without permission. Not because she was wise and strategic, but because she was clear. She took action without a plan when something in her said, go. She quit just as boldly when something in her said, enough. So when you leave here today, don't pressure yourself to map out everything. This is not about blowing up your life and starting over. This is about reclaiming ownership. Let your ambition be yours, finally. Because ambition will take you far, but only alignment will make the journey worth taking. And in this world that is pressuring us with clicks and followers and all these metrics, the world that is this unpredictable, and it's handing you borrowed ambition day in, day out. I hope you have the courage to choose your own. Thank you.
I was just wondering, a student of ambition, is it possible to live without ambition, even before we talk about whether it's borrowed or it's authentically mine?
I think it's human nature to be ambitious. And for me, this is what I found, because I'm curious about other people's ambitions. I'm always asking about other people's ambition, and I see it everywhere. So I don't think it's possible to live without it. The thing we mistake though, we all choose our right level of ambition. Society tells us there's a certain version of ambition we should follow.
Dr. Anne, another thing I wanted to find out, and I'm looking at this from the context of Africa and Kenya, where we are at a situation sometimes where we are sort of surviving. And we've been taught about Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so that I want to be linear for as long as I'm surviving. Maybe later on when I start to actualize myself, I can start figuring out about that 7 year. You must have been Paul, 7 year. Interesting. Let me hear from you. Yes. What are your thoughts?
It's easy to sort of use that as the limitation. It's a boundary you're making up, saying, oh, because I'm surviving, I cannot be honest with what I want. The reality is there are people struggling with what they want at every level. There are people who have all the money in the world struggling with what they want. There are people who have nothing struggling with what they want. So it's more of a mindset and what you decide about it, because it's not about the situation you're in, it's how you're experiencing that situation. And how we do it, how we experience is always a choice. It's not a choice we actually intentionally activate because we think we don't have that choice. Because you could be, struggling, living in a tiny space, maybe almost homeless and struggling. Somebody else could be living, nice 1-bedroom and enjoying their life. You have more alignment with what you want, more than the person who's just chasing what the world is telling them. And the joy, our human joy, comes from the alignment. It doesn't come from how much money you have and what achievements you have. So when we say we're in survival mode and we deny ourselves that chance to stay aligned, then we're losing out on that instead of...
Thank you so much, Dr. Anne, for the presentation. I have a question. What words of encouragement would you give people who, because of circumstance, feel like borrowed ambition is all they have? So think about people who come from families where your parents have literally invested everything. They've spent their entire lives working for you to meet this particular goal, or people with multiple siblings, and for whatever reason, you're the only one who can go to school. You're the only one who can pursue this thing. So because of that, your life is literally this box. And because of the investment that has been put in you, it feels like if at any point in time you deviate from this, you're not just letting yourself, it's almost like you're wasting all the effort that has been put into you. So how would you encourage someone in a situation like that?
No, that's a very good question, because you're speaking to the African tax, right? I think the internet calls it that, the tax of being the one your family depends on, your society depends on in most cases. It is something that you have to be nuanced about to say, I know my family depends on me, and I'm going to give them what they need. But you also have to carve out a place. You know, you've heard the thing about put on your mask before you do others. Because if you're not strong and steady, then they'll have nothing. So you have to carve out some space. It'll feel selfish at first when you start doing it. It'll feel like, oh, I should just be expending everything that I have to my family, to my people. I need to, climb the ladder as quickly as I can get there. But I have seen people climb very quickly for that same reason, but get there and fall apart. Now it's not just you falling apart. All those people that depended on you have nothing. So it may feel selfish, but that's how you have to think about it, is I have to take care of me in order for me to take care of others. And taking care of you is asking these questions of how do you maneuver. It's not about disrupting everything and saying, oh, I'm going to go find, I'm going to go to Asia and find myself. It's not about that. You can be nuanced about it. For example, when I left the lab, I didn't quit. I stayed in the same company. I just found a different role that was more aligned to me. So as long as you're asking the question, then you can see, okay, what option do I have? The problem, most of us don't even ask the question. Then we're stuck with that. And we're thinking, no one stopped us. We stop ourselves by not even asking the question.
What if you're at risk of losing your financial, let's say, payment, if you were to actually choose what you want to do? Like, for example, if let's say you do IBA, your parents have paid for you to do IBA, but in your heart you want to study, let's say, drama or fashion or these quote unquote unserious courses. So what do you do in that position where if you want to actually go ahead and study fashion or drama, your parents would revoke that financial payment for your education, your university fees?
That's something that people also just check themselves. And so they decide they're not going to pursue the unserious things because they don't want to be, the kid that wasted money. This is what I would say. When you're following your authentic path, the linear path is very efficient. The nonlinear path is not efficient. It's not about how quickly can I get to what I want. In your case, if I were in that situation where I wanted to study drama, for example, and my parents would only get for the MBA, you have to look at education as it is a means to something. It is not the thing that you're doing. Education is about the experiences you're having, what you're integrating. Because when you become the drama person or the fashion designer that has an MBA experience, now you're a unique person. You're different than the other fashion designers that didn't have the MBA. So don't look at the MBA as, oh, this is wasting my time. The MBA is building something. If that's what your parents are willing to pay for you, do it. And then you will find a way to get to the fashion on your own, as long as you keep the question present. The problem is we give up on the fashion and then we just put it on the side. But it's on you. It's on you to keep on that. Your parents are coming from a place that makes sense for them. Because for your parents, they don't want you to struggle. And they think these useless degrees will make you struggle. And so that's why they're paying for the MBA. But we also know MBA people that don't have jobs. So that story is not fully complete. Work within the boundaries that you have, because you can't create a world that doesn't exist. Work within the boundaries. But if you stay true to this is what I want, this is what feels honest, it'll be a longer path. The nonlinear path is a longer path than the other paths. But you will find your way eventually, as long as you stay focused. And once you find your way, you'll have so much more than the people who came straight. Because every path you're going, you're collecting pieces. You'll arrive there with so many bags, you'll be a much more fulfilled person.
I just wanted to ask a question on the part of realigning, because a brief background is I come from a business family entirely, and luckily enough, I've been given the opportunity to rediscover myself. I had a 2 gap year before I started university. But the issue is when you're from a family that is used to what works, how best do you make them aware of the fact of their further more angles to what meets the eye? Still in the business line, but Vice Chancellor that he gave an example of in the African setup, there's so many things we're limited to, just maybe because of our economies and the level of exposure. Because if you tell, for example, I used to tell my late dad that I wanted to do financial markets, but to him that was a very blue area. And it was a risky venture. It was something that's going to lose money. So how best do you get support in such a line of work?
That's a good question. And it speaks to how do we integrate what we know, because For you, you're very clear. You know what you want. If you want to get into financial markets, you're clear that's a way. You have to look at it from their angle. Looking at it from their angle doesn't mean you follow their angle. You just look at what are the fears that they have and how can I mitigate the little fears that they have. So let's say, their worry is, oh, you'll not get a job or something like that. Go do some research of people they may know that work in that market. That way, because where they're coming from is a legit fear, because they don't know anybody who works in financial markets. You have to give them the data to close the gap. Because most of the time when people are telling you not to do that, it's coming from a place of fear. But it's also coming from a place of wanting the best for you. Don't take their fear to be they know something that you don't. Their fear is just the fear of the unknown. So help them close that gap. Find some information and talk to them to understand, really, what is it? It's because they don't want you to suffer. Let them know how you have already considered that. You have already thought through that, and you're not going to suffer. It's okay. And the thing that we're also not comfortable with is the fact that falling down doesn't mean you'll never get up. Even if you fall, you'll get up. They may not know how ridiculously you failed a class, and here you are, you're still in university. So they may be afraid that, you will trip once, and then that will be the end of you. Show them how many times you've tripped, how many times you failed, and you're still here, you're still strong. That way you bridge the gap for them. So that's what I'd say. It's just understand where they're coming from. Be curious about what their actual fear is, not just the statement. What is their actual fear? And then try and bridge that gap for them. That way you can still pursue, because we keep abandoning our ambition to go to what other people, but the other people are just wanting the best for us. They're just thinking that's what is best for us. We need to educate other people on why we're pursuing what we're pursuing.
You had the luxury to, or let me not say luxury, but you had the opportunity to get to the peak of your career. You got your PhD before you turned back and had to restructure everything. But we are faced with the question of survival against alignment. At what cost will I risk alignment for? I can choose to go that path and, say, realign myself and choose what my selfish ambitions want according to who I am and my values. But then I'd be risking everything else. Because right now, yes, there's safety and security in alignment. Not much, but there is some, and that's what they sell. But you also can't ignore that. You're speaking to the, 10%, if they're lucky, to get to your position, and let's say 30% who will regret that decision. So you're selling a chance, but they're also doing the same, using this path, linear path. So at what point do I have to risk? Because all leaders are faced with the question, I bear it so that they don't have to. So if I choose the linear path, I pursue my ambitions, not my fulfillment, but my ambitions, my selfish pursuits towards money, towards wealth. In doing so, secure an opportunity for the further generation, my children and my children's children, to get the opportunity or to have the luxury to ask themselves that question. Because at this point, most of us actually don't have the luxury to choose that choice. So how would you overcome that?
It's a choice between alignment and survival, is how you're framing it. We're used to framing things as binary, and that also creates its own friction. We're used to saying you choose this or the other. And what I was trying to say is you take this and that and you bring them together. It's about closing the gap between the two. It's not about, I'm going to leave ambition alone and go choose alignment. You're trying to close the gap between the two. And if you frame it as, I'm surviving, I have no time for anything else, then it looks that way. It looks like you can't do the two things. But in every situation of your life, there is an opportunity for you to get closer. If you're doing a degree, how can you bring yourself into that? The box is fixed. This is what you're doing. But how can you bring your version of yourself into the thing that you're doing? That's how you don't lose yourself. You can't just be like, this is what I'm doing, so forget about me. You can bring yourself in whatever box you've been put in. It'll take a while to arrive at where it's more alignment than other things, but don't look at it as it's a binary choice. Every opportunity you have, try and bring it along.
We talked about ambition, and people wanting the best for you. But what do you do in cases where people think you are overly ambitious? Okay, lower your expectations. There's not much for you. Calm down. How do you deal with that kind of pressure from the people around you? This one is not the borrowed ambition per se, but it's your ambition and people are telling you calm down or change your ambition, which in a way I see as borrowed ambition. So how do you maneuver that? Thank you.
Yeah, I hear the questions. And so yours is, it's too much. Just calm down. Find the very best way to ignore them. Ignoring them doesn't mean now you don't talk to them or you don't, like, talk to them the same way I talked to the gentleman before. Be curious about where that is coming from and bridge it. Bridge it for them. They are probably scared for you failing, and so they're like, why are you going for all these things and you're just gonna fail? Like, instead of you failing, just stay where you are. Ignore them because no one said you're gonna fail. You do what you need to do, but figure out a way to communicate to them. That way you address the fear that they're having. Because it's not about your ambition, it's the fear they have of you failing, and then they think they'll have to catch you. You may be the first example that they see of that, and so that's why they're worried. You keep doing what you're doing.
Wow, thank you so much. A round of applause for Dr. Anne again. Thank you, Dr. Ari, for breaking this down. I must confess that from this talk, I now realize I love mathematics. You are a chemist.
Yeah.
Why we had linear equation and nonlinear equation in our syllabus, and why both of them are important to bridge the gap. I appreciate her. She's not in a hurry to leave. I know some of us would want to go to class. So I would want to bring this to a close, but the conversation going. But always remember, what grounds you matters more than how fast you move.
Yeah.
We need to recognize, rediscover, and realign. Ladies and gentlemen, help me appreciate Dr. Anne T. Maghas.